Good evening, everyone. Gemma, thank you so much for a really informative, interesting, and towards the end, deeply moving reflection on the role that text and words play in kind of, our collective consciousness and the worlds that we live and share. I would be remiss to not acknowledge that we meet here on Wajak Noongar Boodja at Walyalup this evening, and to pay my respects to ancestors, including my own, and to mention all of the incredible First Nations people who continue these enduring cultures through into the here and now. That was really profound, Gemma, and I just want to kind of thank you for such a well-articulated and fragmented, as is the world we live in and everything that we do. So rather than launching sort of straight into dialogue more about text and words, I thought it would be a good opportunity if anyone in the crowd had a question that they would like to ask Gemma or myself, if it's about Undertow and the exhibition. There is a microphone there, which you're welcome to come up to and to offer a question. Anyone?
Oh, God.
Anyone? Okay, cool. No worries. If at any point you would like to ask a question, please make your way up to said microphone and just wave at one of us and we will reply. Oh, do we have a taker? Do we have a taker? Yes, we do. Sam Blore.
Hello, Sam.
Everyone hates being the first. Someone's got to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gemma. I don't think there's one thing you didn't cover that I could ask a question about. I think you gave me more questions to ask myself. But Glenn, I guess in approaching curating the show, how you, did you get to a point and you realised, there's a lot of text in this, or was it a conscious thing, or how did that kind of unravel into the work? And I'll sit back down as you answer.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think it was conscious. I think from quite early on, and I mean, it's great because Gemma was often in these meeting rooms with me, so she can attest to the truth or lies of my historic retelling of exhibition making. It was conscious. I knew that, there were artists that I was working with and approaching and talking to that either had written word or they had audio components in their work. But it wasn't like a primary concern. It was more a kind of, I think you picked up on this, Gemma, this idea of a word also being an image and the power of that. And we were doing a sort of sound check earlier today and talked a little bit about the profound nature of words and their absolute capacity to transport us and the magic that they hold. It is a magic that is completely layered with privilege and position, particularly when we delve a little deeper into issues on this continent around literacy and numeracy with First Nations people who had their languages systematically erased as a part of the colonial mission and agenda. So they're magic, they're complex, they're profound, they're contradictory, and they're binary. And I love that in that exhibition it's not just the privilege of those who can read, it's also audio offered for those who can feel, and that even someone who does not have their hearing could even have an experience in there as well. So while there is a text thread, I think deeper than that is language and the power of our bodies to make sounds that communicate and connect with each other. And in our conversation this afternoon, we're just talking about like texts that we've loved. And mine, one of the works that I found truly magical was a work by the recently departed Lawrence Weiner when I was working on the MoMA show at Agua. And that was simple text that said, rocks upon the beach, sand upon the rocks. And where that takes each of us. And the power of those words is that it can take us to a place of tranquility. But for me, having almost drowned a few times as a kid, it takes me to a place of danger. And so that is magic, that a simple string of words can transform us that way. So I think in Undertow, it was an idea. It was a kind of thing. It was like, this is cool. Look at all these people working with words. I love words. This is great. But more than that was that kind of vision of what artists do when they reveal a history and what a wave can do when it erases one. So, yeah, that's a long answer, but
no, I think
I'm good at
that,
waxing lyrical.
I think that that's something that I really butted my head against in the text was this desire for poetry, and then also the sense that that the text creates a definition, and I suppose coming through the institution of an art school where you're always often defending your work, and words are this way that you mount a defense of something, or they can sort of lose their power and their magic. And it's really exciting, I think, at the moment to see a lot of artists exploring poetry and forms and forms of sort of even illustrated text that reclaim some of the power of the words without necessarily having to explain, just to let text be and to carry you on a journey. But I still find that tension between thinking and feeling is really interesting and is really well captured in works that use text.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting, that dilemma between thinking and feeling. I think that manifests in the contemporary world as this thing we all know to be anxiety.
Yeah.
I think we often we're fighting our thinking brain to try to feel more or feel less. And yeah, I think that's
that was the subtext of that whole that whole thing. Like in case it wasn't really obvious, that's there's sensations or no. How do I find how do I reach for a context to explain what I'm feeling, or how do I trust that feeling to be true? And then beyond that, when you reach for those sources, and then you sometimes, some of the kind of the canonical things that you learn, I even think about the things that I read as a teenager, all of the kind of the barrage of often white male authors. I remember reading Jack Kerouac and Hunter S. Thompson, the things that you reach for in trying to explain your position. Even that simple thing of of hitting, I suppose, like a wall of understanding. I don't know what I'm explaining now. I don't know. Just I suppose slamming your head against the cannon, often and often and often and often.
I think what's manifesting there is a thinking-feeling dilemma.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then
One of the things that you picked up, we think about history and it's the placement of windows to see certain things through our cultural lenses and in our kind of nation-state positioning. And I think we often interrogate history, and we want to kind of explore those, the histories that have been kind of systematically removed from our national consciousness, the histories that are held in Nyungar language with community that are often spoken about as if they haven't been there the whole time. But I think something that really came from listening to you was the power of art history to erase and to delete and to limit the voices of certain people. And I just, thoughts on that?
I don't think it's necessarily true of art history, and I also don't necessarily I don't think it's something that happens. I don't think it's a thing that's done consciously often. I find that, when I reflect on the way that I was taught art history, which was around a practical arts degree, where art history was almost a sort of an appendix that went around a physical kind of an experience of making, where there wasn't time, I suppose, to go into the depth of or the nuance of things. And often when lecturers, and then when you end up in that position, you're often reaching for the key things, but through the process of repetition, or through this kind of ongoing kind of again and again, the publishing the same names that appear, then there is this reinforcement that produces an erasure not just because, but it definitely means that there's a whole, there's just a whole world of complexity underneath whatever you're being told at any one moment. And I think, I also think that there's fundamental problems with the way that art history is taught in universities, in the way that we are, we're here on Noongar Budja, and our education doesn't start with that we are reaching for a place that is grafted onto here, and that, I mean, it's a bigger question that I really know how to answer. But if you learn something that then you have to unlearn, then that system seems broken.
Yeah.
And it starts by, I think, something that I'm always really conscious of doing is acknowledging, I suppose, who I am and the things that, and what privileges I have, and then that's I suppose the beginning of something. I don't know.
Let's go back a little bit to your PowerPoint, which I really loved in its simplicity, but also its kind of layered complexity. It featured a rare thing, which was an image of one of your own works.
Oh.
And we talked a little bit about kind of that earlier today, but you also talked about those works as almost being the pre-word, pre-writing. Tell us a little bit about that kind of in-between space between image and text that those works embody, and also what the act of making them is for you as a secret artist, not so secret now.
Well, no, I mean, I always talk publicly about having a secret art practice, which is kind of a tautology. And I wanted to, I regret telling you about it because now that was one of my works, because now I have to talk about it. But
sorry, not sorry.
It's fine. Those drawings I do when I can't make sense of things. They often start from doodles in meetings at work. They often start when I'm working through a thought, or there's a thing that I can't find the language for, and then it becomes they start from almost a place of automatic writing, which is why I'm really interested in asemic writing and calligraphy and all of these things that sort of sit between the word and image that kind of capture something of the essence of speech, but without actually having necessarily content, because they do feel, when you're making them, like they feel kind of magic. They sort of feel like they come from somewhere else, and they're on the verge of being legible, but they're not. And that's a really interesting space to sit in, particularly as somebody who is often commissioned or asked to speak in contexts like this, where then you're faced with this task of finding the precision of that language or drawing all of these sources together from history. And when often mostly the sound I just want to make is like, ah, like it's like a wordless, like, like those are the actual sounds. Like there's a slim chance that the content of this lecture could have just been 30 minutes of just like, but it wasn't that.
No.
But then
we would have also been as enthralled, I think.
Glenn told me that I could be experimental, but that might have been pushing the boundaries.
There was a moment of sigh, which I thought was absolutely perfectly timed.
Oh, thanks.
Because I think it was the power of that sound is a release as well.
Yeah, and I have that challenge because I know it. Like I speak very quickly, and my brain moves very quickly, and I have like a very active sort of an internal voice. So spending some time in like non-thinking is a really, it's a peaceful place, but it's a sort of like in between place for me, I guess. And so I've that practice has been secret because I wanted to keep it for myself a little bit, but it feels like it's gradually sort of sneaking out into the world, and I'm becoming more comfortable with that, or like starting to understand it in relation to like the other writing that I do, like this sort of whatever this was, or like that, like how does this interest in non-language correspond to an interest in like what words can hold.
I think we're like just in that moment there. It's also that you wrote to speak, right? And so they're very different spaces. One is kind of really with yourself, and the other is very much about kind of communicating with others. And I think that taking of words from the sponge in our brains and manifesting them through a syntax of letters that we understand to then speak them again. Like I find that such an interesting journey. There's no answer or question in that, but I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Question for you. Can the word silence ever be as moving as silence itself?
Well, I just don't think silence really exists at all. I don't think it's a real thing, like your heart's always beating. Like I think silence is a really interesting idea, and that's why I really fixated on it as a word, because it doesn't, as quiet as you are, you're always in your body, and your body makes noise, and perhaps meditation can bring you to a place of peace. I remember being in a Kim Suja work, like one of those chambers that I forget what they're called, where you go in and there's like the
sensory deprivation.
Yeah. And you still like there's never not.
You start to hear your bones creak.
Yeah, there's never not sound. And then so it's interesting that humans would then create a word for something that is like the hope of something that doesn't exist. Like it's a fascinating idea. And I think that's why the word is so useful, because it has these boundaries. But like how would you otherwise visually represent silence? What is that?
It's a hard one, because for me it's like, okay, well, I see nothing. It's emptiness, or like it's just darkness. But then it becomes darkness.
But emptiness and silence are different concepts. Yeah. And this is, I suppose, the precision that words give you, where the text doesn't. And I suppose why they're so appealing to see visually and to place your body in relation to, because you get to work through all of those nuances and details.
Earlier today we talked a little bit about the process of writing and bringing words into the world. And you asked me my process. Oh. And so I'd like to ask you yours. Where do you start when you're bringing words into the world?
I think it's different with every project. Sometimes there's a first line, and like also often, like I approach every project as though I'm never going to be I'm never going to be able to write again. Like anytime someone gives me an assignment, I'm like, yes, great, I would love to do that. So interesting. And then I have an internal panic and I think that like even though I've produced writing before, that it just won't come. And then in order to bolster myself against that, I tend to fill myself up with references, which is sort of what happened in this case. I came to the exhibition, I looked at it, and I had all of these thoughts, and then I remembered I got really stuck on the Socrates with this one. Like I remembered the Phaedrus, and I remembered this text, because it's so different to, I suppose, the way that reading, and it's obviously not the real text because it's translated from Greek, but it's often so different to the way that philosophy is described in removal.
Yeah.
And then so I wanted to get to like the bones of like, well, what is writing, or like what has been written about writing, or like what are all of these sources that I can draw into my body that are about text. Like you end up like reading the Gospels. Like I've never been baptized. I don't know anything about God, but like I was like, in the beginning is the word. Like what does that mean? Oh, it means and then you're like, oh, logos, which is like reason. And then I found myself like every kind of channel that I went down was this sort of this different philosophical cul-de-sac, and then so it kind of just all goes in there, and then it just kind of comes out in parts. And then it's finding a structure. And some things when I'm writing, some things either have a really clear direction or they have no direction. Mm. And this was an instance where it had no direction. So I had all I could do was the fragments, because I didn't have the clarity, or I didn't really know what there was. I didn't. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It's that in-betweenness again, you know.
And it's so big, you know. Yeah. There's so much of it, that the fragment, I guess, and the attraction of the fragment means that you can put things together, and hopefully they spark,
or they create a shape. Of some form.
But no, it's really different. And then I just, as I'm like driving, actually, I do like a lot of my writing like just on Stirling Highway, just like, and then I go home and type it out. I don't know.
Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier, it's that moment just before I fall asleep that I have a solving of a problem that's been in my head around how to approach a text. And the choice in that moment is like, either I wake myself up and write that down and get all the blue light in my brain and don't sleep properly, or it disappears.
But it does feel that when you solve the problem, and I'm like, I'm not sure that I haven't really solved this problem, but there were moments, and I particularly like that last bit where I was like, oh, thank God, like that's what it is. And it does feel like it almost comes from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it feels like you feel very relieved, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, it's that that magic, I guess, that we were talking about before. Just to give a bit of context, I have been trying to write a text, and I won't give you all the details, but trying to write a text for 6 months and not knowing which way to approach it. And at like 12:45 last night, just in that moment before I drifted off to sleep, I had 3 words pop in my mind, and they were beauty, tyranny, and tragedy. And that is the framework for this text I've been trying to write for 6 months. And if I hadn't have woken myself up, I would have woken up going, oh, what was that again? But it is that magic of where those words come from sometimes.
And that's the one thing, because I find it very difficult to, like, I feel I go to work and I write a lot of emails and I do a lot of spreadsheets, and occasionally I have a creative thought, and then I come home, and then sometimes there's a creative moment, but I find it very hard. Like, often there's a sense that there should be a practice that you have as a creative professional, where there's a process that sits over the whole lot and makes it coherent. But everything, like, so my process is, if I'm making a work, is different, or if I'm writing a text is different, or if I'm curating a show is different. But that feeling of it being resolved and the key turning is the only thing that's, like, the only thing really that carries from all of those things. This is maybe getting pretty abstract now. I don't know whether we're quite away from the...
Is it too abstract, or is this trajectory okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we're doing
okay, good. Right.
Good work.
Yeah.
I think that T kerning?
The T kerning.
The key turning moment.
Words.
Yeah, words, right? That key turning moment is, like, sometimes you wait for it and you try to force it and it just doesn't happen. And I think that is the magic of words, is that sometimes they arrive with you. And for me to try to explain that, that's not my job. But as a person who also has a kind of lineage and belonging to this continent that's very ancient, that sort of, the complexity of language is a real challenge, because for, like, my family, I remember saying to my dad and Nana, I'm going to do some language lessons, some Nunda language lessons, and they were like, don't speak it to us, because it just fills us with sadness. And that was a really interesting moment for me, because I think you picked up on it, the complexity of us speaking English here, on Wajak Nunga Buja, and, that is an active force. But equally, there is an active force that comes with, as a First Nations person, relearning language. There's a really beautiful quote by Jambawa Marawili, a Yolngu man from northeast Arnhem Land, that talks about an Aboriginal person or a Yolngu person without their language is like a snake without its tongue. And I think that is, it's such a deeply kind of tragic, beautiful, poetic sequence of words originally spoken in Yolngu Mata. But I just sort of think in the context of what we're talking about, and the active force of English being the primary language of this place, it's a really interesting thing to reflect on.
And it's difficult. I mean, not that I don't know any other languages, but English is quite clumsy. It's not. I mean, there's lots of very beautiful English poetry, but it doesn't. You can feel the misfit often. Yeah. And that's an interesting space to sit in.
And I remember, like, I was in Aotearoa, New Zealand a few years ago, and I put a lot of effort into learning te reo Māori to be able to get up and give my mihi, my introduction. And in that moment I spoke in Māori, English, and publicly, which I do very rarely, in Dutch. And there was something that really moved in me around the relationship between language and belonging. Because one language, a coloniser's language from the Netherlands, which is layered and complicated and has also been a tool of violence, gave me a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt even speaking my own First Nations languages. So, it's complicated. Really, really complicated.
It's really complicated.
Any questions following this waxing lyrical? Anyone got anything they'd like to offer? Say, Fiona Gavino, down...
Would you consider now, after more than 2,000 years of language existing in the world and social media, I really feel like all of a sudden text has become its own medium in art.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this was, I mean, the thing that I remembered from, and I think the reason why I wanted to go back to, I'm just talking about Socrates again, was that beginning.
The Socrates kind of night.
Is that I just think that they've always been connected. Like, I just think that's like they've always been together, and that impulse of putting the word and image together, and it's, even if it's taught as new, it's taught as recent, it's taught as belonging to the 20th century. I don't think they're as maybe separate as we've been led to believe.
Yeah.
But there is, the issue the thing that we have, there's just so much of it there's so much of it in the world now. And you mentioned social media, and that's the I think the key challenge of the moment is like where, and also why it works when it's so precise, because we live in a world of very lazy language where there's lots of things that are disconnected from meaning or disconnected from reality or from care. So when text is precise and when it does become an art form, that's when it really kind of hits. But I guess it has, maybe it's its own art form, but I don't know. I suppose the thing that I'm coming to understand is that I just don't think they're as separate.
I guess in kind of following on from that, it's like we talked about the idea of pretext, and the idea that symbols and iconography, paired with the sounds we make from our human body, paired with the sounds that we hear in the world from the things we create or the things that exist, are essentially the kind of formative elements of a written word. And for me, if I think of kind of the earliest examples of that on this continent, like the petroglyphs at Murujuga, a picture of or a shape of an emu is not dissimilar from EMU. Serves the same purpose, creates the same image in one's mind.
In fact, it's more efficient, actually.
Far more efficient. Yeah. One shape versus three.
You can see what it is. Like, you have to know there's. Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting thing, that relationship between symbol, icon, typeface, and, rather than separating them, is seeking to find connection between those, to understand the evolution of communication and sounds and words and the things we make with our bodies that helps us to connect with each other. Wow. Got a question for me?
I want to hear more about your influences in the realm of text-based art. I was interested to hear you talk about Lawrence Weiner before, who's great, such a great synthesis of that, of the concept and the poet. Like, it's everything is just like perfectly in together. There's just he's such a good writer. Yeah. But I'd like to know more about the works that have influenced you in your text art journey.
Look, I was a pretty young green curator at Agua, and so had a world like 17,000 objects to disappear into when I was bored or slightly disinterested in what was going on in the admin building, which wasn't that regularly. But I had a world to fall into, and I was lucky to be working quite closely with artists from Proper Now, many of whom work with text as a medium, and at that time I think I was really centering maybe for the first time my own political schema by which to understand the world, and a lot of what I was feeling as an angry biracial 20-year-old something in a curatorial role in a state institution that kind of felt born of and belonging to the colony in so many ways, through presenting the works of Vernon Archie and working with Tony Albert a couple of times, and Richard Bell, and the research associated with trying to develop particularly the photographic holdings and of the Indigenous collection there. I just was really moved by the simplicity of words like this. Australia, drive it like you stole it, And I think the capacity for there to be simultaneous satire, critique, and anti-nationalism in single sentences. But I think you picked up on this. made and manifested into the world with this incredible sense of care and nurture, knowing that these statements, which are kind of ultimately responses to kind of systemic violence, were the voice manifest of whole generations of First Nations people around the country.
Well, I think that precision is a really interesting thing about text, and I think this is often the same with poetry, where people think about poetry as being overly expressive, or there's like this sort of sense of like a florid, but poetry is precise. Like there's nothing that's out of place there, and that's when things really work. Where there's like not a thing in text where there's, and then but it just can hold so. You can hold everything in a single sentence, an entire history. You can hold like so many emotions. I just think, and also just being allowed, like the text allows you to be angry. It allows you to feel really intense feelings in a way that also allows you to be distant, like safely distanced from them, is a really useful thing. Yeah, and I think that it can do.
That happened like working with Amanda Bell on the Bullock work in the exhibition. So Amanda's first major neon offering, which now lives on the back wall here, the Muditch sign, was kind of a work of such positivity, of community building, of togetherness, of that work is an invitation for all non-Indigenous people to kind of take a moment to really consider the power of positivity, reconciliation. Like it's such a moment. Yeah. And for Amanda to make a work which is, you beautifully kind of interpreted in your talk, which is literally etched in rage in the wall of that gallery, was a real nerve-wracking moment for her. Yeah. And in writing the poem that sits in front of the Yonka grave, she kept editing, and I'm sure Amanda would be fine with me sharing this, but kept editing and in some ways trying to make that text safer, both for you as a non-Indigenous person. I hate the term non-Indigenous. I would like to find new words around that, but it is what it is, because I don't like to non anyone. But, it's safe for you, but equally she was creating safety for her. And I said to Amanda, like, this is where you get to be angry. Yeah. Like, feel the rage, push the rage out. And if I feel like there's too much browbeating going on or that it's dangerous for you, then I'll let you know. We'll have a chat about it.
That's really interesting, because the thing that I find that I've wanted to unlearn, or the thing that I really am often quite angry about my arts education, is like being taught detachment as a position. Yeah. Where, like coming through a time where like irony was king, and you couldn't really have a feeling, or you could like an authentic expression was in a sense like that you would need to abstract it through kind of several layers of like material investigation,
which give you a distance from the feeling.
But it's useful. It's interesting to think about that detachment as a form of safety as well. So while as I want to kind of crawl through it into a place that feels less mediated, that sense of detachment for somebody else is a form of cultural safety. That's a really interesting idea, I think. And like, so maybe language is like the middle ground. Yeah. That means that you can kind of meet in
it's a common ground. It's a common ground. And I think if we take care with the words we bring into the world, and we consider the safety of those words for broader audiences beyond our intent just as an individual of what we want them to say, then I think that we can create common ground with words. But equally, words can be weaponized in such horrible ways, and are, both in our everyday, through to our media, through to, our history. Words play a powerful role. So I think, they can be both common ground and bring us together, but also be highly divisive. But I think that idea of safety is an interesting one to kind of sit with.
Yeah, everyone's just working through stuff, aren't they?
We're all just working through, pushing through.
Does anyone have any questions?
Anna Reese, to the microphone.
Hello. So my question to you two as arts administrators who dabble in creative thinking, curators, is actually in relation to contemporary culture and GIFs and memes. And I'd love to know I happen to know that both of you frequent
The world of meme.
those worlds.
That's my sacred art. It's not my sacred. That's my real sacred art practice.
Right. But in terms of the power of placing text on existing images, or younger, new generations of artists or new generations of politically engaged young people using text and using images, it's that kind of the new version of sign writing, potentially, where you're not making a placard and you're not carrying it around, but you're shooting it out there. And so I'm just wondering, I suppose, what your response critically is to this emerging, it's not emerging, it's here, but the use of GIFs and memes and its place in contemporary culture.
Oh, I'm all for it. Bring it on.
As a little test, do you do the screenshot of the odd meme that you like?
Who does not do that?
Okay, so as a little test, I'd like you to tell me what the last thing you screenshot was as a meme. Mine came from.
Well, it was
Kate.
Oh.
You are here, crying in the shower before work.
Oh yeah.
And it's a picture of the Milky Way.
Oh yeah, no, that's.
That was mine. So what was your last meme screenshot? Where's your phone?
Well, it was the one that I used in.
Oh, okay, the art students.
Yeah. But I thought long and hard about it. It was like, what is the meme that I should use in that context? I had a big think about that.
I really love it.
Whether I should use something local, because local meme discourse has been hot lately.
Perth Heart. What was the other one? Perth Heart versus.
Oh yeah. No, we don't need to open this. We don't need to open this.
I think we don't want to erase history.
Look,
either,
memes belong to everybody. There's a reason why when an arts organisation tries to make a meme, they're terrible. Memes are there to speak truth to power.
Yeah.
I think.
What do you think about the anonymity of a meme? About the invisibleness of its makers? Because are you speaking truth to power? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, right? I don't know. I don't really mind. I just thought I've got a phone notification. I want to see if someone's texted me a meme.
Someone in the crowd texting right
now. But no, look, I think. My opinion about the meme discourse is that we in arts organisations, and even perhaps we as artists, need to be ready for criticism. It might not always be well articulated or even relevant to us, but I think that it is still useful. I don't know.
I mean, I love a meme. I think they can be really powerful. I think they can often it's like something really salient wrapped up in a funny wrapper. And actually at the core of it, I think there's often really kind of interesting discourse. I love their immediacy, and I think that's the thing that comes with, an existing image, which we already have in many instances built a relationship to. So the meme relies on us having some visual relationship already to the existing image, and then recontextualizes that through the applique of a thought or an idea or a political message.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get, it's not Susan Sontag, is it? But a good meme when you see it, a good meme has some punctum or something, or whatever it is. Yeah. But it is the only reason, painting. There's certain mediums, and this is the challenge of art, is that. One of the many challenges of art is that certain things have been deemed art because of their long-standing, a long time. People painted because there was no other mediums for a long time. Yeah. And I think that we as arts administrators, or who are essentially let's be honest, a kind of gatekeeper of. I mean, we are we work in institutions that allow.
I like to consider myself a conduit, but gatekeeper sometimes when required.
Yeah, I mean the conduit opens and closes. Let's be real.
If it's got a switch on it, yeah.
But I think we need to be open to change, like to shifting the definition of art to accommodate new forms.
Well, I think
the meme is like I just think I'm keen to see what happens.
So I guess if we think about art as
what was the actual question?
Was that our thoughts on
thoughts
meme
on-
culture and GIFs? Yeah.
Like what as an art
I'm just
form?
really enjoying the flow, and I think you
Okay.
should go.
Okay.
So can I offer a little thing? All right. So if we think of culture versus art, right? Right. Can you not?
Sorry.
If we think of culture versus art, and if you think of First Nations understanding of culture, so that you've got culture embodying storytelling, ceremony, ritual, language, human movement, visual art, craft, for want of a better word, the making of votives, so that's culture, right? And what I love is that now there's so many great First Nations memes. So the inclusion of the meme within the broader understanding of culture and art and all the other words, kind of it just is. And I like your kind of reflection on that. You're keen to see what happens.
Yeah, I think we're in it. I don't think we know yet. But I think we should be open to it.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes a meme can be a more efficient criticism than a 3,000-word essay, and we're all quite time poor, so maybe that...
So next time I ask you to write an essay, you just come back with a meme. And I'll do the same, and we'll just pay each other and it'll all be good.
Yeah, what are the Nava rates for meme production?
I think I've got a conversation with someone from Nava soon. I think that's what we'll start our conversation with, and it's been a really great thing to wrap up on. Something so contemporary.
Something to think about.
So very contemporary. One last question, if there is one. Hello.
Given the presumably infinite set of relationships between text and image over the totality of history, it's no wonder that your talk was very rich, and I probably have to hear it again or read it to really find out what interests me, which is where you're actually coming from. I mean, there are a lot of notes, shall we say, of disapproval, things that you're out of love with, binaries, colonialism, things that it's easy to disagree with, art history sometimes, various other things. And at the end, I sort of got the sense of, okay, that's what's bad, and what is good, therefore, was some sense of feeling, some sense of communion. I wasn't quite sure whether it was largely to reside in texts or images or in the relationship between them. But I wonder also how you managed to avoid the critique that you're launching at other things. I mean, obviously the situation we're in now is one of a power regime. The microphones, the screens, the stage, the semicircular chairs, which is fine. It's inevitable. But where are you really coming from?
I think that's a really great question, and I think to be honest, I really struggled with taking a position. It
could be that the fragment, the lack of a position, is what makes you disappear as a target while you're launching all these other weapons.
I think that's I really enjoy that as a read, actually. I think that's probably very true, in that I wanted to say that at the beginning, is that the talk was what I put together had been a way of working out what I thought, and I don't know whether I had honestly arrived. I think that's a good critique, is that I haven't arrived at a position, and I think you're right that I am, but I also don't want to be. I don't want to be definitively for or against any anything. I mean, I know that's like a kind of like a piss-weight position, but I want to advocate for the position of openness, if anything, in that I think often, and the things that I pull together and the things that I place myself in opposition to are things that say it has to be one way or the other. Are the things that make kind of quite definitive and totalitarian, like maybe totalitarian is too strong a word, but that say that art must be this or art must be that, or that practice must be this and practice must be that, or there's that and that. So I think, and maybe it's cowardly to maintain that in all circumstances, because there's definitely things that you shouldn't and shouldn't like commit to. But I think where we are now at the moment, there's lots of judgments made all the time about everything. Like everyone's taking a very hard position on everything all the time, like really defining themselves against things. And so I think there's something to be said for staying open,
yeah.
which I realise is like a really it's kind of a weaselly non-answer. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think I'm definitely I'm for feeling, and I'm for
thinking, and the spaces in between those two.
Yeah.
I think just to kind of, your comments have made me think a little bit about Sam Blaw's work in the show here too, because I think that when Sam and I were talking at length about the works in the show, that one needs to take a position, but one needs to be open to hearing the echoes that position creates, or the responses that position creates. And I think that's the openness that you're really talking about, Gemma, as well.
I think where I really struggled, because I often found that I had some sort of received knowledge about whatever source that I had come into contact with. I'd been like, I've learned this about this work, or I've learned this about this moment in history. And any time you do any research, and then of course that's when you learn about the complexity of things. And so that's where the capacity to change positions is really essential. And I mean, I think so. My background is for a long time I was the curator of a women's art collection, and I found and I spent a long time looking at, I suppose, only feminist theory, only women artists, only this particular lens of things. And I kind of I found the end of this. So for a lot of the time, all of the writing, anything that I did was through a very specific lens. And then in this talk, I came I got to the end of it of things, and it was like every source that I've looked at has been, I suppose, like a male artist, or like a male theorist, because for a long time I'd kind of forgotten to engage with those sources, and perhaps in that time that I'd spent away from them, it was sort of 6 years of 6 years of having these kind of necessary blinkers in a sense, where that was all the research went. I was like, I'd made some assumptions about what these things meant that I was interested to rediscover and to re-engage with. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but
I think that distance is really interesting.
Yeah. And to come back to something and say, the canon. Yeah. But also
But also life. Because we change as people when we take distance and time away from things. So to reapproach something with a new scheme, a new lens, is always an interesting thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's what am I for? I suppose that's you're probably going to need another 40 minutes, which we don't, which we don't have. But I think that I really appreciate that read, and I'm really going to think about that, because I know that I deliberately avoided taking a position.
And I think that's
in writing that. So I think that's because I I find in those works is like in these text works in here is actually like the confluence of so many different things.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing, Gemma, is that we've asked you to explore what's text got to do with it. We haven't asked you to reveal on this stage your ultimate truth, and that's
and
that.
I realized I talked a bit about love, and I didn't do it. I didn't do what's love got to do with it, and I wasn't played on by the song either. So
But I think
that's a missed opportunity.
But I think there was also love in your last statements around that exhibition. There was love and care and generosity.
I mean, I guess maybe I'm for love and care and generosity. Like, those are some things to be for, right?
And I think that there are three things that we should all be for. So,
Yeah.
Gemma Weston, I would like to... Oh, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks for having me.
Gemma Weston, I just wanted to take this moment to thank you so much for your mind and your heart this evening on stage, for what you've allowed us to see. I also wanted to thank you for your support in my most recent 2 incredible projects. It's been a delight and privilege working with you in your role at the Perth Festival. So thank you so much. It's been amazing. And also just to wish you all the very best for this next chapter of your life, starting with our neighbours over at Art on the Move. So if everyone could put their hands together and thank Gemma for what she has shared with us tonight, that would be amazing. We have I'm just going to check the time. The galleries will remain open for a little bit longer if you want to do a quick run through. We're also open until April 26th, so there's time to come back. What's text got to do with it? A lot. And on that, I'm sorry, someone's just sent me a really good meme.
It's from a recent meme page, Uncle Billy's Little Secret, and it's the meme of Basil Zempler saying, "As it happens, I'm a multidisciplinary artist working and living on stolen land." Wow. Sorry.
Wow. Thanks, everyone, for coming for the first edition of these disclosure sessions, which we'll offer for each season of our exhibition. So please keep an eye on our program. The next one will happen during the Revealed exhibition and will be a panel of amazing, incredible, strong Black women talking about the role that reconciliation and art have together, and the way that we can use art and culture and words to find common ground together as a really...
I'm sorry for bringing Basil Zempler into
No, it's okay. We quickly got past that.
Okay,
So,
great.
yeah, watch this space. Keep coming back. We love having you here. Stay safe and well, and see you all soon.